Love didn't feel romantic anymore. You know that quiet moment when you're sitting next to someone you love, yet your chest feels strangely empty? Not angry. Not dramatic. Just flat. That's how this story begins. Not with a big fight, not with betrayal, but with silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if love slowly packed its bags while you were busy surviving. If you've ever felt tired of trying, tired of explaining yourself, or secretly asked, is this still love? Then stay with me. This video is for that version of you. When I first moved to the United States, love still felt warm. Everything was new. New streets. New accents. New rules. Even our arguments felt adventurous back then, like we were just adjusting. But something changed. Not suddenly. Quietly. Like seasons shifting when you're not paying attention. One day, you wake up, and what used to feel romantic now feels transactional. Who cooks? Who works late? Who forgot to listen, again? You start noticing it in small ways. Conversations become shorter. Laughter feels scheduled. Touch becomes functional. And the scariest part? You don't hate each other. Hate would be easier. Hate would mean passion is still alive. What you feel instead is emotional jet lag. You're in the same house, but different emotional time zones. Living in the U.S. amplifies this feeling. America moves fast. Productivity is praised. Independence is worshipped. Everyone is busy becoming better versions of themselves, often alone. You don't notice it at first, but slowly, love starts competing with calendars, work shifts, immigration stress, bills. Whether that messes with your mood, and a culture that quietly tells you, handle it yourself. And your nervous system? It's confused. Psychologists call this emotional numbing. When stress becomes constant, your brain doesn't stay in panic mode forever. That would burn you out. Instead, it lowers the volume on everything, including joy. So you stop feeling deeply. Not because you don't care, but because your brain is trying to protect you. Here's the uncomfortable truth I had to face. I didn't fall out of love. I fell into survival mode. You see, when you move countries, your identity takes a hit. You lose familiar language, social status, routines, even humor. You're constantly translating words, emotions, expectations. That mental load doesn't disappear when you get home. It follows you into your marriage, sits between you on the couch, and whispers, you're too tired for connection. And then culture adds another layer. In many cultures, love is shown through sacrifice and emotional closeness. In American culture, love often looks like respect for space and independence. Neither is wrong. But when two systems clash without conversation, love starts feeling misunderstood. One person feels abandoned. The other feels controlled. Both feel unappreciated. At this stage, most people assume something is broken beyond repair. They think romance died. But neuroscience tells a different story. Romance doesn't disappear, it gets buried under stress hormones like cortisol. High cortisol reduces oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Less oxytocin means less warmth, less trust, less emotional safety. In simple words, your body is too stressed to feel in love. So if love feels distant right now, it might not be your relationship failing. It might be your nervous system begging for rest. But here's where it gets tricky. When romance fades, our brain loves creating stories. We're not compatible. They changed. I chose wrong. These thoughts feel logical, but they're often stress narratives, not truth. Under stress, your brain becomes a courtroom where every memory is used as evidence against love. I remember thinking, we used to talk for hours. Now we barely talk at dinner. What I didn't ask was, what drained us so deeply that silence feels safer than conversation? And this is where healing quietly begins, not with grand gestures, not with dramatic talks, but with a pause. A moment of honesty. Admitting to yourself, I'm exhausted. I'm overwhelmed. I don't feel romantic because I don't feel safe enough to be vulnerable. In the U.S., many couples experience this but don't name it. They blame love instead of pressure. They blame personality instead of environment. Climate matters too, long winters, less sunlight, seasonal depression. Studies show reduced sunlight directly affects serotonin levels, impacting mood and connection. You're not imagining it. Your body feels different here. Once I understood this, something softened inside me. Not magically, but enough to stop attacking love for being quiet. I stopped asking, what's wrong with us, and started asking, what happened to us? That shift matters. Because love doesn't need constant fireworks. Sometimes love needs recovery. Sometimes romance doesn't need more effort, it needs less pressure. Less fixing. Less proving. If you're in this phase right now, here's one small, grounded step you can try. Not a big talk. Not a relationship lecture. Just this, name the exhaustion before naming the problem. Say, I feel tired and disconnected, instead of, you don't make me happy anymore. Your nervous system hears the difference. So does your partner. This first step doesn't solve everything. But it opens a door. And healing always starts with a door slightly open, not a wall torn down. Love didn't feel romantic anymore, not because it was gone, but because it was waiting for understanding. Culture shock inside marriage. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you and your partner are arguing in the same language, but somehow speaking completely different emotional dialects. Same words. Different meanings. That's culture shock inside marriage. Not the kind you read about in travel blogs, but the quiet, exhausting kind that lives in tone, timing, and expectations. If you've ever thought, why are we fighting about something so small? This is probably why. When we first arrived in the United States, we thought culture shock would be about food, weather, or paperwork. We didn't expect it to sneak into our marriage. But it did. Slowly. Politely. Like an uninvited guest who never announces themselves, yet rearranges your entire living room. In my culture, love was emotional presence. You checked in. You noticed moods. You read between the lines. Silence meant something was wrong. In American culture, silence often means respect for space. Independence is not distance, it's care. No one explains this to you. You're just expected to get it. So when my partner needed space, my brain translated that as rejection. When I needed reassurance, their brain translated that as pressure. Same relationship. Two operating systems. Constant glitches. This is where many couples start blaming personality. You're too sensitive. You're too cold. But psychology says this isn't personality, it's cultural conditioning. Your brain learned love through repetition. What you saw growing up. What was praised? What was punished? When two different systems meet under stress, misunderstanding isn't a failure. It's predictable. And stress in the U.S. is constant. Work schedules are tight. Conversations are efficient. Time feels like a limited resource you're always running out of. So emotional repair gets postponed. We'll talk later becomes a lifestyle. And later never really comes. There's also the issue of directness. American communication values clarity and efficiency. Say what you mean. Mean what you say. In many other cultures, meaning lives in context, tone, and timing. So when someone says, "I'm fine," one culture hears honesty, the other hears a warning signal. This mismatch alone can create daily friction. Here's the part no one prepares you for. Culture shock doesn't fade with time if it's never named. It settles into habits. You stop explaining yourself because it feels pointless. You stop asking questions because you're tired of defending your feelings. That's when love starts feeling heavy instead of safe. Neuroscience explains why this hurts so much. The brain craves predictability. When emotional responses feel unfamiliar, your nervous system stays on alert. That alertness looks like irritability, withdrawal, or constant overthinking. You're not dramatic. Your brain is trying to protect you from emotional uncertainty. I remember one argument that lasted less than 5 minutes but drained me for days. Not because of what was said, but because of how it was said. Flat tone. Straight facts. No emotional cushioning. My body reacted as if something dangerous had happened. Tight chest. Shallow breathing. That's not weakness, that's biology. What changed things wasn't winning arguments. It was understanding the system mismatch. I stopped asking, "Why don't you care the way I do?" And started asking, "How did you learn to show care?" That question changed everything. Because it invited explanation instead of defense. Curiosity instead of accusation. Research in cross-cultural psychology shows that couples who explicitly talk about cultural expectations experience higher relationship satisfaction. Not because they agree on everything, but because ambiguity decreases. When expectations are spoken, the brain relaxes. Safety increases. Oxytocin has room to return. But let's be honest, these conversations feel awkward. They don't sound romantic. They sound like training manuals for humans. Yet they're necessary. Love across cultures isn't about passion alone. It's about translation. Here's a simple practice that helped us. When something hurt, instead of reacting immediately, we named the framework. In my culture, this means, or I learned growing up that love looks like, that one sentence lowered defensiveness instantly. Because it reframed conflict as difference, not attack. Another small but powerful shift, separating intent from impact. Intent lives in the mind. Impact lives in the body. Both matter. You can mean well and still cause pain. Acknowledging impact doesn't erase intent, it honors reality. Living in the U.S. adds another layer. Policies, systems, and social norms encourage self-reliance. You're praised for handling things alone. But marriage isn't a solo sport. When both partners try to be strong all the time, connection weakens. Strength without softness creates distance. Climate even plays a role. Long workdays indoors. Less spontaneous social interaction. Less communal support. All of this increases pressure on the relationship to meet every emotional need. That's a heavy burden for any marriage. At this stage, many couples assume love is fading. But what's actually fading is shared meaning. And meaning can be rebuilt. Healing didn't start when we agreed more. It started when we judged less. When we treated differences as information, not threats. When respect replaced the need to be right. If you're experiencing culture shock inside your marriage, try this grounded step. Choose one recurring conflict and ask, what cultural expectation might be hiding underneath this? Not who's wrong. Not who started it. Just what expectation is clashing. Understanding doesn't erase pain overnight. But it creates space. And space is where healing breathes. Culture shock almost broke my love, not because love was weak, but because respect hadn't learned the language yet. Weather changed, so did we. Have you ever noticed how the weather can quietly change who you are before you realize it? Not in a dramatic, movie scene way, but in subtle shifts. Your energy drops, your patience shortens, your smile shows up less often. Now imagine that happening while you're also learning how to love across cultures, in a country that feels unfamiliar. That's when I realized something uncomfortable but important. The weather didn't just change outside. It changed us inside, too. Before moving to the United States, I never thought climate mattered that much in a relationship. Weather was background noise. But then came the long American winters. Shorter days. Gray skies. Less sunlight. More time indoors. Fewer casual conversations with strangers. At first, it felt cozy. Then it felt heavy. And without noticing, that heaviness started slipping into our marriage. You stop going out. You stop moving your body as much. Your circadian rhythm, the internal clock that regulates mood and sleep, gets confused. Science backs this up. Reduced sunlight lowers serotonin levels, which affects mood, motivation, and emotional regulation. In simple terms, your body feels less hopeful, even when nothing is wrong. Now here's where it gets tricky. When your mood changes, your interpretations change too. Neutral comments sound colder. Silence feels louder. Small misunderstandings feel personal. You don't think, I'm affected by seasonal changes. You think, why does love feel harder now? That's exactly what happened to us. We began misreading each other's emotional signals. A quiet evening wasn't rest, it felt like distance. A need for space felt like withdrawal. We weren't fighting more, but we were connecting less. And disconnection is sneaky. It doesn't scream. It whispers. Living in different regions of the U.S. amplified this. Climate varies wildly here. East Coast winters feel different from West Coast fog. Midwest cold hits differently than Southern heat. Each region shapes daily routines, social habits, even how people express warmth. When you're not aligned with your environment, your nervous system stays slightly unsettled. Psychology calls this environmental stress. It's low-level, chronic, and often ignored. But it accumulates. And relationships absorb that stress like a sponge. I remember one moment clearly. We were sitting inside on a cold afternoon, both on our phones, the room dim even though it was daytime. Nothing was wrong. Yet everything felt off. That's when it hit me, we weren't disconnected because we stopped caring. We were disconnected because our bodies were tired of surviving the environment. And here's the mistake many couples make, they personalize environmental stress. They assume the relationship is the problem, instead of asking how the environment is shaping behavior. In the U.S., this happens a lot. Weather limits social life for months. Work culture pushes productivity over presence. Policies and systems reward endurance, not emotional awareness. So couples normalize emotional flatness. This is just adulthood, they say. But numbness is not maturity. It's often untreated stress. Neuroscience offers an important insight here. When your body feels chronically uncomfortable, cold, dark, inactive, it prioritizes survival over connection. Your brain allocates less energy to empathy and bonding. That's not a character flaw. That's biology. Once I understood this, I stopped blaming us. Instead, I started observing patterns. When did we feel closer? On sunny days. After walks. During trips to warmer places. When we moved our bodies. When light entered the room, literally. So we made small, almost boring changes. We chased sunlight. Morning walks, even when it felt inconvenient. Brighter indoor lighting. Short outdoor breaks during the day. These weren't romantic gestures. They were nervous system support. And slowly, warmth returned, not just to our skin, but to our conversations. Another shift was acknowledging seasonal mood changes out loud. Saying, "I feel heavier in winter," normalized the experience. It removed blame. Research shows that naming physical or emotional states reduces amygdala activity, the brain's fear center. In other words, awareness calms reactivity. We also learned to adjust expectations. Winter wasn't the season for big emotional breakthroughs. It was the season for gentleness. For maintenance. For not making life-altering decisions based on temporary emotional weather. This matters, because many couples make permanent decisions during seasonal lows. They mistake temporary disconnection for permanent incompatibility. But moods change. Light returns. Energy shifts. That doesn't mean ignoring real issues. It means timing matters. If you're living in the U.S. and feeling emotionally distant from your partner, ask yourself this grounded question: how much sunlight, movement, and rest am I actually getting? Not ideally. Actually. Here's one practical step you can try this week. Choose one daily ritual that adds warmth, physical or emotional. A short walk. A shared coffee by a window. A lamp that mimics daylight. Small inputs can create big emotional outputs. Weather changed, and so did we. But change doesn't always mean damage. Sometimes it's information. A signal asking for adjustment, not abandonment. When we stopped fighting the season and started supporting ourselves through it, love felt possible again. Quieter, maybe. Slower. But real. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from fixing the relationship. It comes from understanding the environment shaping it. When arguments became daily. There's a special kind of exhaustion that comes from arguing every day, not the loud, dramatic fights you see in movies, but the quiet, repetitive ones that start over nothing and end with everything feeling heavier. You know the kind. The argument about dishes that somehow turns into a debate about respect. The comment about timing that becomes a judgment about character. When arguments become daily, it's rarely about the topic. It's about something much deeper asking to be seen. At that stage, we weren't yelling. That would have meant energy still existed. Instead, we were sharp, short, efficient with our frustration, like Americans are taught to be with time. And that efficiency slowly drained the warmth out of our conversations. Every exchange felt like a negotiation. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who started it? Who's tired of explaining? Daily arguments don't show up suddenly. They grow from unspoken disappointments. From moments when you needed comfort but got logic. When you needed space but got questions. When you needed reassurance but got silence. Each moment seems small, almost forgettable. But your nervous system remembers all of them. Psychology explains this through something called emotional accumulation. The brain doesn't process unresolved emotions in real time. It stores them. Then one day, someone forgets to text back, and suddenly you're not reacting to the text, you're reacting to the last 100 moments you swallowed. In the U.S., this pattern is common, especially among couples balancing work pressure, cultural differences, and emotional fatigue. The culture rewards problem solving, not emotional processing. So instead of saying, "That hurt," people say, "That doesn't make sense." Logic replaces vulnerability. And vulnerability, when postponed too long, turns into irritation. I remember noticing how fast my body reacted. Heart racing. Jaw tightening. Shoulders up. The argument hadn't even started yet, but my body was already preparing for battle. That's not anger. That's anticipation. My nervous system learned the pattern and tried to protect me by staying alert all the time. Neuroscience calls this hypervigilance. When conflict feels frequent and unresolved, the brain scans constantly for threats, even in neutral moments. That's why daily arguments feel so draining. You're never fully at rest. And here's the cruel part. Once arguments become daily, you start seeing your partner as the problem instead of the situation. Your brain simplifies the story. They always, they never, those words feel accurate in the moment, but they erase nuance. They turn a complex human into a predictable enemy. Cultural differences made this worse. Direct communication met emotional interpretation. One side thought clarity was kindness. The other felt clarity without warmth was rejection. Both felt misunderstood. Both felt justified. Arguments also became a strange form of connection. When you don't feel close, conflict can feel better than distance. At least someone is responding. At least something is happening. The brain prefers negative engagement over emotional absence. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. We weren't fighting because we hated each other. We were fighting because we didn't know how to reconnect safely anymore. Research in relationship psychology shows that recurring arguments often signal unmet attachment needs. Not flaws. Needs. The need to feel valued. Chosen. Secure. When those needs aren't named, the brain expresses them through protest, criticism, defensiveness, withdrawal. The breakthrough didn't come from better arguments. It came from interrupting the pattern. We started noticing timing. Most arguments happened when we were hungry, tired, or transitioning from work mode to home mode. That's not coincidence. The brain needs recovery time. Without it, emotional regulation drops. So we created buffer zones. Short pauses before serious conversations. Not avoidance, regulation. Another shift was slowing down the response. Not the conversation. The response. When tension rose, instead of reacting immediately, we named the state. I feel defensive. I feel overwhelmed. That simple naming lowered the intensity. Studies show labeling emotions reduces activity in the brain's threat center. Awareness creates space. We also learn to stop solving and start validating. In American culture, fixing is love. In many other cultures, presence is love. Mixing the two without awareness creates conflict. So we practiced responding with acknowledgement before solutions. That makes sense. I see why that hurt. Not agreement. Recognition. It felt awkward at first. Almost scripted. But the body doesn't care if something feels natural at first. It cares if something feels safe. Over time, the arguments lost their daily rhythm. Not because problems disappeared, but because urgency softened. When people feel heard, they don't need to shout through repetition. Here's something important if you're in this phase right now. Daily arguments don't mean your relationship is failing. They mean your system is overloaded. And overloaded systems need relief, not judgment. Try this practical reset. Choose one recurring argument. Just one. The next time it appears, pause and ask a different question, not who's right, but what is this argument protecting? Is it protecting dignity? Autonomy? Connection? Once you identify the need, address that, not the surface issue. When arguments became daily, love felt fragile. But fragility isn't weakness. It's sensitivity. And sensitivity, when handled with care, becomes strength. We didn't stop arguing overnight. But we stopped treating arguments like enemies. We treated them like signals. And once we listened, the noise slowly softened. Politics entered our home. You don't expect politics to show up at your dinner table. You think it lives on screens, in headlines, in loud debates between strangers. But one day, it slips into your living room quietly, wearing everyday clothes. It shows up as a comment about the news. A tone change during a conversation. A pause that lasts a second too long. And suddenly, you realize politics didn't just enter your country, it entered your relationship. At first, it felt harmless. We were just talking about policies, social issues, how things worked differently in the United States. But over time, those conversations became tense. Not explosive. Just tight. Words carried weight. Silence carried judgment. And without noticing, we started protecting our opinions instead of protecting each other. Politics in the U.S. isn't just about laws. It's about identity, values, belonging. When you live here long enough, opinions start to feel personal, even when you don't mean them to. You're encouraged to stand your ground, speak your truth, defend your beliefs. None of that is wrong. But when that mindset enters a marriage without care, it turns dialogue into competition. I noticed how my body reacted before my mind did. A slight clench in my stomach when certain topics came up. A faster heartbeat. My brain preparing responses before the other person even finished speaking. That's not intelligence. That's threat perception. Neuroscience explains this clearly. When beliefs are tied to identity, disagreement activates the same brain regions as physical danger. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference. So when politics entered our home, it didn't feel like a discussion. It felt like risk. Cultural background made this harder. In some cultures, political disagreement is softened by indirect language. In the U.S., directness is often seen as honesty. So what one person considered being clear, the other experienced as being harsh. Intent and impact drifted apart. There was also fear underneath it all. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being judged. Fear that differences meant incompatibility. That fear didn't come from politics alone. It came from the pressure of living in a polarized environment where disagreement often equals rejection. Psychology calls this emotional fusion. When beliefs fuse with self-worth, any challenge feels personal. And in close relationships, that fusion becomes dangerous. You're no longer just discussing ideas. You're defending who you are. I remember one evening clearly. A simple comment about a current event turned into a cold distance that lasted hours. We didn't yell. We didn't insult each other. But something closed. The room felt smaller. And that silence was louder than any argument. That's when I realized the real problem wasn't politics. It was safety. When people don't feel emotionally safe, they don't listen, they prepare. They don't explore, they protect. And protection looks like rigidity. Like sarcasm. Like withdrawal. Like needing to win instead of understand. Research in relationship science shows that couples who survive ideological differences don't do so by agreeing. They survive by prioritizing emotional security over ideological alignment. In other words, respect matters more than being right. But respect doesn't mean silence. It means structure. We had to learn how to talk about difficult topics without letting them define us. The first shift was separating values from policies. Values are emotional. Policies are technical. Mixing the two creates chaos. So we started asking, what value is this opinion protecting? Freedom? Fairness? Safety? Once values were named, empathy became possible. Another shift was setting boundaries around timing. Not every moment is right for heavy conversations. Discussing polarizing topics when you're tired, hungry, or stressed is like pouring gasoline on a spark. So we agreed on windows, times when we had enough emotional capacity to stay grounded. We also practiced something that felt almost unnatural at first, reflecting before responding. Instead of countering immediately, we summarized what we heard. Not to agree, but to show understanding. So what you're saying is, that one sentence slowed everything down. The nervous system responds to being seen. Living in the U.S. also taught us something important. You are constantly exposed to outrage. Algorithms reward intensity. Media thrives on division. If you don't consciously filter that energy, it spills into your closest relationships. Awareness became a form of protection. Here's a practical step if politics are creating tension in your relationship. Before discussing an issue, state the goal. Are you trying to understand, or are you trying to persuade? Those are different conversations. Confusion happens when one person wants connection and the other wants victory. Another grounded practice is this: remind each other out loud, we are on the same team. It sounds simple. Almost childish. But the brain responds to reassurance. It lowers defensiveness. It reorients the conversation from threat to collaboration. Politics entered our home, yes. But it didn't have to take over. Once we centered respect instead of righteousness, conversations softened. Not because opinions changed, but because the relationship became more important than the debate. If you're struggling with this right now, remember, disagreement doesn't destroy love. Disrespect does. And respect is a skill you can practice. In a world that constantly asks you to choose sides, choosing understanding at home is a radical act. And sometimes, healing begins not when you speak louder, but when you listen longer. I felt unseen and unheard. Have you ever been in the same room with someone you love and felt completely invisible? Not ignored in a dramatic way, no shouting, no doors slammed, but unseen in the quietest sense. Like you could disappear for a moment and nothing would change. That's a specific kind of loneliness. And it hurts more than being alone, because you're technically not. That's where I found myself during this chapter of our life in the United States. The arguments were already wearing us down. The cultural differences were still unresolved. And now, a new feeling settled in being unheard. Not misunderstood. Not disagreed with. Unheard. As if my emotions were speaking, but no sound was coming out. What made it confusing was that my partner wasn't cruel. They were functioning. Working. Providing. Showing up in practical ways. On paper, everything looked fine. And that's what made me doubt myself. If nothing is wrong, why do I feel so alone? Psychology has a name for this, emotional invisibility. It happens when your inner experiences aren't mirrored back to you. When no one reflects your feelings, your brain starts questioning their validity. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this isn't important. Over time, you don't just feel unheard, you stop speaking. Living in the U.S. intensified this. The culture values independence and self-regulation. You're expected to manage your emotions privately. Don't burden others. Be strong. Be efficient. That mindset works well for productivity, but it quietly erodes emotional intimacy. When both partners internalize it, silence becomes the norm. I noticed how often conversations ended with solutions instead of understanding. I'd share how I felt, and within seconds, the response was advice. Fixes. Logic. None of it wrong. But none of it comforting. My nervous system wasn't asking for answers. It was asking for acknowledgement. Neuroscience explains why this matters so much. The brain is wired for social validation. When someone reflects your emotional state, through words, tone, or facial expression, it activates safety circuits. Oxytocin releases. Stress hormones drop. When that reflection doesn't happen, the brain stays alert. Guarded. Lonely. And here's the painful part, the more unseen you feel, the less clearly you communicate. You start minimizing. Hinting. Hoping the other person will just get it. But minds don't read minds. They read patterns. And the pattern they see is silence. Cultural differences added another layer. In some cultures, emotional attunement is expected without explicit requests. In American culture, needs are often expected to be stated clearly. So when I waited to be noticed, my partner waited to be told. Both of us thought we were doing the right thing. Both of us felt neglected. I remember one night saying, "I feel like I don't matter." And the response was, "That's not true." It was meant to reassure. But it landed like dismissal. Because what I needed wasn't correction. It was curiosity. What makes you feel that way? This is a common mistake in relationships, especially cross-cultural ones. We rush to negate pain instead of exploring it. But pain doesn't need to be disproven. It needs to be understood. Research in attachment psychology shows that feeling emotionally seen is one of the strongest predictors of relationship satisfaction. Not agreement. Not shared interests. Feeling seen. When that need isn't met, people withdraw emotionally long before they consider leaving physically. And that withdrawal looks like numbness. Like indifference. Like giving up on explaining. It's not apathy, it's self-protection. The turning point came when I stopped asking for change and started asking for presence. Instead of saying, "You never listen," I tried saying, "Can you just sit with me for a minute?" That shift mattered. It lowered defensiveness. It made the request human instead of accusatory. We also learned the power of reflective listening. One person speaks. The other mirrors back what they heard, not to agree, but to show understanding. What I hear you saying is, this simple practice is backed by decades of research. It slows conversations down. It signals care. It makes people feel real again. Another crucial change was naming the pattern, not the person. I feel unseen when conversations move too quickly to solutions. That sentence doesn't attack character. It describes experience. And experiences can be responded to with empathy. Living and working in the U.S. often keeps people in problem-solving mode. But relationships aren't problems to solve. They're systems to feel. When feelings aren't given space, they don't disappear, they go underground. Here's a grounded exercise if you're feeling unseen right now. Choose one emotion you've been carrying quietly. Just one. Name it out loud without explanation. I feel lonely. Then stop. Let the other person respond. Resist the urge to justify. This creates a moment of truth. And truth, even when uncomfortable, is connective. Another practice is daily emotional check-ins. Not long. Not heavy. Just one question, how did today feel? Not how was your day? Feelings invite depth. Facts invite summaries. Feeling unseen doesn't mean you're unlovable. It means a signal is being missed. And signals can be learned. Once I felt truly heard, even imperfectly, something shifted. My body relaxed. My words came back. And love, which had been quiet for so long, started whispering again. Being seen is healing. Being heard is grounding. And when both return, connection has a chance to breathe again. The night we almost gave up. There is a moment in every long relationship that doesn't look dramatic from the outside but feels final on the inside. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just a quiet, heavy pause where both people stop fighting, not because things are better, but because they're too tired to keep hoping. That night came for us in America, and it didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with exhaustion. We were sitting across from each other, the room dim, the day already spent. Nothing special had happened. That was the scary part. No big mistake. No betrayal. Just the slow accumulation of everything we hadn't resolved. Cultural misunderstandings. Emotional distance. Daily arguments. Feeling unseen. It all sat there between us like a third person we didn't invite. I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Not in a dramatic, tragic way. More like how you realize a phone battery is at 1% and there's no charger nearby. You don't panic. You just accept what's coming. In the U.S., giving up doesn't always look like quitting. Sometimes it looks like being practical. Maybe we're just not compatible. Maybe love isn't enough. Those sentences sound mature, rational, even healthy. But sometimes they're not clarity, they're burnout talking. Psychology calls this emotional depletion. When people experience prolonged stress without relief, the brain conserves energy by shutting down hope. Hope is expensive. It requires imagination, effort, vulnerability. When your system is overloaded, hopelessness feels like rest. That night, we weren't angry anymore. Anger needs energy. We were flat. Detached. And detachment is dangerous because it feels calm, but it's actually a sign that the nervous system has given up on repair. I noticed how quiet my body felt. No racing heart. No tension. Just emptiness. Neuroscience explains this as dorsal vagal shutdown, a state where the body disconnects to protect itself from overwhelm. It's not peace. It's collapse. In that moment, the idea of ending things felt strangely relieving. No more explaining. No more translating emotions across cultures. No more trying to be understood in a system that felt stacked against us. The American lifestyle had taught us to be efficient. And efficiency whispered, cut your losses. But something else happened too. A thought surfaced that surprised me. If we stop here, will we ever understand what actually went wrong? Not to assign blame, but to learn. To grow. That question slowed everything down. Many couples reach this night and don't talk about it. They quietly disengage. They coexist. Or they leave. And sometimes leaving is necessary. But sometimes, the night you almost give up isn't a sign to end, it's a signal that the old way of relating has expired. What saved us wasn't a sudden realization of love. It was honesty without strategy. Instead of listing complaints, we named states. I'm tired. I feel empty. I don't know how to fix this. No solutions. No defenses. Just truth. Research shows that vulnerability without agenda reduces emotional threat. When there's nothing to win, the body relaxes. We also acknowledged something important. Living and working in the U.S. had changed us. The pressure to be resilient, independent, self-sufficient. Those traits helped us survive, but they hurt our connection. We had become good at handling things alone, and terrible at leaning on each other. That night, for the first time in a long time, we stopped trying to be strong. Strength had become a performance. And performances don't heal. There was silence after that. But it was different. Softer. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of processing. Of letting the nervous system come out of survival mode, just a little. Attachment research shows that repair begins when both people feel safe enough to admit uncertainty. Certainty creates walls. Uncertainty creates openings. We didn't decide anything that night. No promises. No ultimatums. Just one agreement: we won't make permanent decisions while emotionally depleted. That single boundary mattered. It protected us from turning temporary pain into permanent loss. If you're in this place right now, the night we're giving up feels easier than continuing. Pause. Ask yourself this grounded question: am I clear, or am I exhausted? Because those feel similar, but they're not the same. Here's one practical step that can help in this moment. Do not revisit every past problem. That overwhelms the system. Instead, name what capacity you actually have. I can talk for 10 minutes. I can listen, but not problem solve tonight. Boundaries aren't walls. They're containers for safety. Another important shift was redefining success. That night, success wasn't fixing the marriage. Success was staying present without escaping, emotionally or physically. Sometimes, not leaving is the bravest thing you can do. The American culture often celebrates fresh starts. New chapters. New lives. And those things can be beautiful. But healing doesn't always come from starting over. Sometimes it comes from staying long enough to understand what this chapter is trying to teach you. That night didn't save our relationship. It cracked it open. And cracks let light in, not the inspirational kind you see on quotes, but real light. The kind that shows you where change is needed. We almost gave up. And that's important to admit. Because pretending you never reached that edge creates shame for others who are standing there now. If you're standing there, know this, reaching the edge doesn't mean you failed. It means you cared long enough to be hurt. And that still matters. Sometimes the night you almost walk away is the night you finally stop running from what needs to heal. Respect was missing, not love. There's a dangerous moment in long relationships when you stop asking, do we love each other? And start assuming the answer is no. Dangerous because it feels logical. Clean. Final. But that assumption almost cost us everything. What I didn't realize back then was this, love hadn't disappeared. Respect had quietly slipped out the back door, and without it, love didn't know how to breathe. After the night we almost gave up, something shifted, not emotionally at first, but cognitively. My brain, exhausted from months of tension, started looking for a simple explanation. We're just not right for each other. That sentence felt relieving. It wrapped chaos into clarity. But it was also wrong. Respect isn't loud. It doesn't announce when it's leaving. It erodes in tiny moments. Interruptions that go unnoticed. Sarcasm disguised as humor. Eye rolls you pretend not to see. Over time, those moments teach the nervous system something dangerous. You are not safe here. In the U.S. This erosion happens faster than people realize. The culture prizes efficiency, honesty, and independence. Those values are powerful, but when they enter intimate relationships without softness, they turn sharp. Directness becomes dismissal. Independence becomes emotional distance. Honesty becomes brutality without care. I noticed how often conversations felt like evaluations. Tone mattered more than content. Winning mattered more than understanding. And slowly, we stopped giving each other the benefit of the doubt. That's when respect breaks, not in explosions, but in assumptions. Psychology explains this through attribution theory. Under stress, humans tend to attribute negative behavior to character instead of context. You're selfish, instead of you're overwhelmed. Once that shift happens, empathy drops. The brain categorizes the other person as a problem, not a partner. And without respect, love starts performing instead of resting. I realized this one evening during a small disagreement. Nothing major. But I caught myself listening not to understand, but to respond. To defend. To correct. That's not love in action, that's ego in survival mode. Respect would have sounded like curiosity. I wasn't curious anymore. Neuroscience offers a blunt truth here. When respect is absent, the brain activates threat responses even during neutral interactions. Your body prepares for attack, not connection. That's why conversations feel exhausting. That's why everything feels personal. The system is always bracing. The turning point wasn't a romantic breakthrough. It was a reframing. Instead of asking, how do we fix love? I asked, where did respect break down? That question changed the work completely. Because respect is behavioral, practical, teachable. Love feels abstract when it's wounded. Respect gives you something concrete to rebuild. We started small. Almost painfully small. No interrupting. Even when it was uncomfortable. Especially then. Research shows that interruption increases cortisol levels and reduces perceived respect instantly. Letting someone finish, even when you disagree, signals safety to the nervous system. We also changed how we disagreed. Instead of absolute language, always, never, we practiced specificity. In this moment. Yesterday. When this happens. This reduces defensiveness because it keeps the brain from generalizing the threat. Another shift was tone awareness. Not policing emotions, but noticing delivery. In American culture, efficiency in speech is valued. But efficiency without warmth feels cold. We practiced soft starts, beginning difficult conversations with connection instead of critique. I care about us, and I'm struggling with that opening matters more than people think. Respect also meant slowing down judgments. Instead of assuming intention, we asked, what did you mean by that? That question saved us countless arguments. Because most harm in relationships isn't intentional, it's misinterpreted. Cultural differences played a huge role here. What felt normal to one of us felt disrespectful to the other. Not because either was wrong, but because respect is culturally encoded. In some cultures, respect means emotional attentiveness. In others, it means not intruding. Without translation, both feel disrespected. Living and working in the U.S. added pressure. Stress reduces patience. Fatigue reduces generosity. Under those conditions, respect must be practiced deliberately. You don't drift into it. One of the most powerful changes we made was repairing quickly. Instead of letting small moments fester, we acknowledged missteps. That came out harsher than I meant. I didn't listen well just now. Repair, according to relationship research, is more predictive of long-term success than avoiding conflict. Respect grows when people take responsibility. Here's a grounded exercise if you feel love slipping away right now. Ask yourself this: do I feel respected in how we talk, argue, and listen? If the answer is no, that's your starting point. Not romance. Not compatibility. Respect. Then choose one behavior, just one, that signals respect to your partner. Let them finish speaking. Put the phone down during conversation. Validate before disagreeing. Small actions carry more weight than big promises. Once respect returned, something unexpected happened. Love felt safer. Not louder. Not more dramatic. Safer. And safety is where healing lives. We didn't suddenly feel like newlyweds. But we felt human again. Seen. Considered. Valued. And from that place, affection returned naturally, not as a performance, but as a response. Respect was missing, not love. And once we understood that, the work became possible. Because love doesn't die easily. But without respect, it has nowhere to stand. Understanding changed everything. There's a moment in every long relationship where you realize love isn't failing, you're just misunderstanding each other at a dangerous depth. That moment didn't arrive for us with fireworks or tears. It arrived quietly, through exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion where you stop fighting not because you've given up, but because your body can't keep misunderstanding anymore. For a long time, I thought understanding meant agreement. If you understood me, you would see things my way. If I understood you, I would eventually agree with you. That belief poisoned our conversations. Every discussion became a courtroom. Every emotion needed evidence. Every feeling was cross-examined. Living in the United States intensified this pattern. American culture values clarity, logic, and decisiveness. Those traits are powerful at work. In relationships, they can become weapons. We weren't trying to hurt each other, we were trying to be right. And being right felt safer than being vulnerable. Understanding doesn't start in the mind. It starts in the nervous system. That realization changed everything. I noticed how often my body reacted before my thoughts did. Tight chest. Shallow breath. Jaw clenched. By the time words came out, my system was already in defense mode. Neuroscience calls this amygdala hijack, when perceived emotional threat shuts down curiosity and activates survival responses. In that state, understanding is biologically impossible. So the question shifted again. Not why don't you get me? But why does my body feel unsafe right now? Once we started noticing physical reactions instead of just verbal ones, the entire tone of our relationship softened. We paused more. Breathed more. Talked slower. That wasn't spiritual, it was physiological. One night, during a conversation that used to spiral fast, we stopped mid-sentence. Not dramatically. Just stopped. I said, I think we're both tense. That sentence alone changed the room. It named the state without blaming the person. Understanding begins with naming reality gently. We also learned the difference between intent and impact. In American communication culture, intent is often emphasized. I didn't mean it that way. But impact lives in the body of the listener. Dismissing impact shuts down understanding instantly. Acknowledging it opens the door. I see how that landed for you, became one of the most healing phrases we practiced. Not agreement. Recognition. Psychological research backs this up. Validation activates the brain's reward centers and reduces emotional reactivity. You don't have to agree to validate. You just have to witness. And witnessing is the foundation of understanding. Cultural differences played a huge role here too. What felt neutral to one of us felt cold to the other. What felt caring to one felt intrusive to the other. These weren't character flaws. They were learned emotional languages. Without translation, both sides felt unseen. Understanding required curiosity instead of correction. Instead of saying, "That's not what I meant," we tried, "Tell me more about how that felt." That one shift turned arguments into explorations. Not every time. We failed often. But each success built trust. Another breakthrough came when we separated feelings from solutions. Previously, every emotion triggered problem solving. Sadness needed fixing. Frustration needed advice. But sometimes feelings just need space. The U.S. self-improvement mindset often rushes healing. But healing has its own pace. I learned to ask one simple question: do you want comfort or solutions right now? That question alone prevented countless misunderstandings. Because understanding means meeting people where they are, not where you think they should be. We also stopped assuming shared definitions. Words like support, freedom, commitment, and even love carried different meanings shaped by culture, upbringing, and personal history. Clarifying definitions felt awkward at first. But clarity builds intimacy. Assumptions destroy it. There's a concept in psychology called mentalization, the ability to understand your own mental state and that of others. Under stress, mentalization collapses. People stop seeing complexity. Everyone becomes either right or wrong, safe or unsafe. Understanding restores nuance. One practice that helped us was reflecting back before responding. What I hear you saying is, this isn't therapy talk, it's respect in action. It shows effort. And effort communicates care more clearly than perfect words. Understanding also meant accepting limits. We wouldn't always fully get each other. And that was okay. The goal wasn't perfect empathy. It was sustained curiosity. Staying open even when comprehension felt incomplete. Slowly, something shifted. Arguments became shorter. Recovery became faster. Laughter returned, not because problems vanished, but because tension no longer ruled every interaction. Understanding created emotional breathing room. Here's a grounded takeaway if you're watching this and struggling. Try this tonight. During your next disagreement, focus less on what you're saying and more on what your body is doing. Breathe. Slow down. Ask one curious question instead of making one statement. That's how understanding begins. Understanding doesn't mean you lose yourself. It means you stop trying to win and start trying to see. And being seen, and seeing in return, is one of the deepest forms of healing. In the end, understanding didn't fix everything. But it fixed the way we faced everything. And that changed the outcome entirely. Because when understanding enters the room, healing doesn't have to fight for space. Small changes healed us. People love big turning points. Grand apologies. Dramatic realizations. A single conversation that magically fixes everything. But that's not how healing actually showed up for us. Healing arrived quietly, almost annoyingly small. So small that if you weren't paying attention, you'd miss it entirely. The truth is, our relationship didn't change because we suddenly understood everything. It changed because we adjusted tiny behaviors that were slowly poisoning the space between us. In the U.S., there's a strong cultural belief in big action. Go all in. Make bold moves. Reinvent yourself. That mindset works beautifully for careers and personal goals. In relationships, though, it can backfire. We kept waiting for a breakthrough moment, while ignoring the daily friction points that actually mattered more. One of the first small changes was how we started conversations. Before, we launched straight into content. Problems. Complaints. Logic. Now, we started with tone. A simple, "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" That one sentence gave the nervous system a heads up. No ambush. No emotional whiplash. Just permission. Psychology supports this. When people feel psychologically prepared, they're less defensive and more receptive. You're not changing the message, you're changing the landing. Another small shift was timing. We stopped having hard conversations when we were hungry, exhausted, or overstimulated. That sounds obvious, but we ignored it for years. In American work culture, pushing through fatigue is praised. In relationships, it quietly destroys empathy. We learn to say, I want to talk about this, but not right now. And we meant it. Delaying a conversation wasn't avoidance anymore, it was care. Then there was language. We replaced you always and you never with lately and sometimes. This wasn't about being politically correct. Absolutes trigger shame, and shame shuts down connection. Nuance keeps the door open. One word changes the entire emotional temperature of a sentence. We also stopped interrupting feelings with explanations. When one of us said, I feel lonely, the other resisted the urge to respond with logic or reassurance. Instead, we tried, that makes sense. Not because everything made perfect sense, but because the feeling existed. Validation doesn't mean agreement. It means acknowledgement. And acknowledgement is oxygen for emotional healing. Another small but powerful change was rituals. Not grand date nights. Not expensive trips. Just predictable moments of connection. Morning coffee together. A short walk after dinner. A check-in question before bed, how are you really doing today? These moments created safety. And safety allowed honesty. Neuroscience shows that consistent positive interactions build relational trust over time. It's not intensity that heals, it's reliability. We also changed how we handled mistakes. Before, mistakes turned into character judgments. Forgetting something meant you didn't care. Saying the wrong thing meant you were insensitive. Now, mistakes were treated as information, not evidence. What happened there? Replaced why are you like this? That one shift alone reduced resentment dramatically. Cultural differences showed up strongly here. In one culture, direct feedback felt respectful. In the other, it felt harsh. Instead of debating which was right, we adjusted delivery. Softer starts. Clearer intentions. Slower pace. Healing required flexibility, not victory. Another subtle change was ownership. We stopped saying you made me feel and started saying I felt. That small grammatical shift returned emotional responsibility to where it belonged. It reduced blame and increased honesty. And then there was repair. We learned that repair matters more than perfection. A quick apology. A hand on the shoulder. A text that says, I didn't handle that well. These micro repairs prevented emotional injuries from turning into scars. Research shows that couples who repair early and often build stronger bonds than couples who avoid conflict altogether. Conflict isn't the enemy. Unrepaired conflict is. One of the most unexpected changes was humor. Not sarcasm. Not deflection. Gentle humor that acknowledged the absurdity of misunderstanding each other while genuinely trying. Laughter softened our edges. It reminded us we were on the same team. And maybe the most important small change was patience. Not passive patience. Active patience. The kind that understands healing isn't linear. That progress includes setbacks. That growth doesn't erase old habits overnight. We stopped measuring success by how little we fought and started measuring it by how quickly we recovered. If you're watching this and feeling overwhelmed, here's something practical you can try today. Pick one small behavior, not a personality trait, not a deep wound, just one behavior. Change that. Speak slower. Listen longer. Pause before reacting. See what happens. Big change is built from tiny choices repeated consistently. Our relationship didn't heal because we became different people. It healed because we became slightly better versions of ourselves, one small decision at a time. And those small changes didn't just heal our marriage. They healed us. Understanding changed everything. Imagine two people speaking the same language, using the same words, yet living in completely different emotional worlds. That was us for a long time. We weren't silent. We talked a lot. But nothing truly landed. It felt like shouting directions through fog, loud, exhausting, and useless. Understanding didn't arrive as a dramatic realization. It arrived as a skill. And like any skill, it had to be practiced badly before it worked well. In the U.S., there's a strong belief that communication solves everything. Just talk it out. But no one tells you that talking without understanding can actually deepen the damage. Words without attunement feel like noise. And noise, over time, becomes stress. The first thing that changed was how we listened. Not listening to respond. Not listening to correct. Listening to understand the emotional logic behind the words. That meant asking, what makes this make sense to you? Instead of why would you think that? That single shift turned arguments into stories. I began to see how my partner's reactions weren't random or dramatic, they were patterned. Rooted in experiences I hadn't lived, climates I hadn't grown up in, systems I hadn't navigated. Cultural psychology explains this well. Our brains are shaped by our environments. What feels normal to one nervous system can feel threatening to another. Once I accepted that, I stopped taking things personally. Understanding also required slowing down. American life moves fast. Decisions are quick. Opinions are firm. Speed is rewarded. But understanding hates speed. It needs pauses. Silence. Space to process. So we learned to stop mid-conversation. Not to avoid, but to regulate. A pause wasn't rejection anymore. It was respect. There's science behind this. Emotional regulation restores access to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for empathy and reasoning. When you slow the body, you open the mind. Another breakthrough came when we stopped assuming shared values. We both believed in love, commitment, and family, but we defined them differently. One of us saw love as consistency. The other saw love as emotional presence. Neither was wrong. But without understanding those definitions, we kept disappointing each other unintentionally. So we asked better questions. What does support look like to you? When do you feel most cared for? What makes you feel safe when we disagree? Those questions didn't weaken our bond. They clarified it. Understanding also meant facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves. I had to admit that my way wasn't neutral, it was cultural. That what I called being honest sometimes felt like emotional aggression. That what I called independence sometimes felt like distance. Self-awareness is a form of respect. And respect is the soil where understanding grows. One of the most healing moments came when we revisited old conflicts, not to rehash them, but to reinterpret them with new eyes. We realized how many fights weren't about the surface issue at all. They were about fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of losing identity. Fear of not being enough in a foreign place. Living in the U.S. amplified those fears. Immigration stress. Work pressure. Social isolation. All of it leaks into relationships. Without understanding, couples blame each other for what the environment is causing. We stopped doing that. Instead of asking, what's wrong with us, we asked, what's happening around us? That reframing reduced shame and increased teamwork. Understanding also changed how we argued. Disagreements became less about winning and more about mapping differences. We used phrases like, here's how I see it, instead of this is how it is. Language matters. It signals openness or closure. We also accepted that understanding doesn't mean comfort. Sometimes you understand someone and still feel hurt. That's okay. Understanding doesn't erase emotions, it contextualizes them. And context is powerful. It transforms pain into information. There's a therapeutic concept called earned security. It means building emotional safety through consistent, understanding responses over time, even if you didn't grow up with it. That's what we were doing, without realizing it. Understanding became our new habit. And slowly, trust returned. Not blind trust. Informed trust. The kind that knows misunderstandings will happen, but also knows they can be repaired. If you're listening to this and thinking, we talk, but we don't understand each other, start here. The next time your partner says something that triggers you, pause and ask yourself, what experience might be shaping this reaction? You don't need to agree. You just need to get curious. Because understanding doesn't require sameness. It requires willingness. And once willingness enters the relationship, healing doesn't feel impossible anymore. It feels inevitable. Love survived because we grew. There's a strange quiet that arrives after a long emotional storm. Not relief exactly. More like clarity. That's where we ended up, not because everything became easy, but because everything finally made sense enough to handle. Looking back, our love didn't survive because we avoided breaking points. It survived because each breaking point forced growth. And growth, when shared, becomes glue. In the United States, growth is often framed as individual achievement. Become better. Stronger. More independent. But relationships require a different kind of growth. The kind that stretches outward instead of upward. The kind that asks you to expand your emotional range, not just your resume. We grew when we stopped trying to return to who we were before the struggle. That version of us didn't have the tools we needed. We didn't need restoration. We needed evolution. One of the biggest shifts was how we defined success in love. Success wasn't constant happiness anymore. It was resilience. The ability to stay present during discomfort. The willingness to learn instead of withdraw. We accepted that love in a multicultural, high-pressure environment like the U.S. would never be static. Policies change. Jobs shift. Social climates fluctuate. If our relationship didn't adapt, it would fracture. Growth became non-negotiable. And growth started with accountability. Not blame. Accountability. Owning our patterns. Recognizing how stress made us rigid. How fear made us defensive. How unfamiliar systems magnified old wounds. Once we saw our behaviors as adaptive responses rather than moral failures, compassion returned. That compassion wasn't just for each other. It was for ourselves. We also learned to grieve. Not just losses, but expectations. The fantasy that love alone would solve everything. The belief that effort guaranteed harmony. Letting go of those myths hurt, but it freed us. Grief made room for realism. And realism made room for hope. Another sign of growth was boundaries. We stopped expecting one person to meet every emotional need. Community mattered. Friends mattered. Space mattered. Love didn't shrink, it stabilized. Psychologically, this matters. Research shows that secure relationships balance closeness with autonomy. When partners support each other's growth instead of controlling it, satisfaction increases. We didn't know the research then. We just felt the relief. We grew when we learned to celebrate progress instead of perfection. A calmer disagreement. A faster repair. A moment of humor where there used to be tension. These weren't small wins. They were evidence of transformation. And yes, we still disagreed. We still misunderstood each other sometimes. Growth didn't erase conflict, it changed its role. Conflict became a signal, not a threat. We stopped asking, "Are we failing?" and started asking, "What is this trying to teach us?" That question changed everything. One of the most meaningful moments came when we realized we were no longer afraid of hard conversations. Not because they were painless, but because we trusted the process. Trust is built when growth proves reliable. Living and working in the U.S. had tested us in ways we never anticipated. Cultural friction. Systemic pressure. Identity confusion. But those challenges also forced depth. They demanded maturity. They shaped a love that wasn't fragile. Growth gave us a shared language. A shared rhythm. A shared commitment to keep becoming. If you're watching this and wondering whether your relationship can survive what it's facing, here's something honest. Love doesn't survive by staying the same. It survives by changing faster than the stress around it. Growth doesn't mean losing yourself. It means bringing more of yourself into the relationship, consciously. Ask yourself this: are you trying to protect your comfort, or are you willing to expand your capacity? Because love doesn't need perfection. It needs participation. In the end, our story didn't resolve with a dramatic gesture or a perfect conclusion. It resolved with stability. With mutual respect. With a quiet confidence that said, "We know how to face things now." That's the happy ending no one talks about. Not fireworks. Foundation. Love survived because we grew. And growth, when shared, turns survival into strength. If you've made it this far, it means part of you is still fighting for understanding, not just in love, but in yourself. Maybe your relationship hasn't failed. Maybe it's just asking you to grow in ways you were never taught. Different cultures don't break love by default. Silence does. Ego does. Fear does. But understanding, real, patient understanding, has the power to heal what looks broken. This story isn't just about my marriage in the United States. It's about anyone who feels lost between cultures, expectations, and emotions they can't fully name yet. And if this resonated with you, there are many more stories like this waiting here, stories about healing, growth, and finding strength when life in America feels overwhelming. If you want more slow, Honest stories that help you rebuild from the inside out. Subscribe to the channel and stay with me. New videos are coming, stories that don't shout motivation, but quietly restore it. And before you go, ask yourself this one question. What could change in your life if you chose understanding instead of control? If that question stayed with you, this channel is for you. Like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this story today.